Hello and welcome to the Pilgrim Way. My name is Norman Graham and I'm a minister in the Baptist Union of Churches in Scotland. The aim of these signposts is to try and help connect the text of the Bible with our everyday lives. Welcome to a new series of signposts called East of Eden. And if you find these signposts helpful, then please subscribe and click on the bell to get notified of future episodes. I want to read three verses from the book of Genesis. Firstly, Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And Genesis 2, verse 8. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. And Genesis 3 and 24 says, after he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. Well, the title comes for this series comes from a John Steinbeck novel of the same name, East of Eden, and it relates to the story of human creation, fall, and banishment from the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis. When Adam and Eve sinned, they were banished from the Garden of Eden, and an angelic being armed with a fiery sword stood guard on the east side of the garden to prevent their return, lest they ate the tree of life and were then eternally separated from God. Their actions and subsequent banishment from Eden meant a change in humankind's relationship with God, relationship with one another, and a relationship with creation itself. Our lives are now lived east of Eden, and Steinbeck's novel kind of covers some of the things about what that life looks like. Genesis 4 and 16 says, Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The land east of Eden is the land of wandering. It is a place where Cain wanders after killing his brother Abel. And as we'll see over the next few signposts, it's also a place of strife as violence erupts and then spreads after that murder. And it's also the place of toil where the man has to struggle with the ground to produce crops to feed himself and his family. It's a far cry from the free abundance and plenty of the Garden of Eden. In the garden, Adam and Eve lived in the presence of God. And so the phrase East of Eden becomes a figurative way of speaking about being alienated, being separated from the presence of God, and all that means. Excuse me. Well, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that we live in a world that is broken on every level. Even a casual glance at the daily news media reveals horrific stories of war, abuse and violence, prejudice, hatred, suffering and neglect. It seems every single day the news brings stories of broken relationships, strife-ridden communities and warring nations. In a recent book, renowned theologians N.T. Wright and Michael Bird have noted that the 2020s appear to be the most precarious and perilous time in human history since the 1930s. They note that we are living in an age of totalitarian terror and dysfunctional democracies. And the present may look bleak for millions of people, billions of people, in fact, around the world, but the future looks bleaker. The problem goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden and our loss of it. As an old Larry Norman song puts it, we left it oh so long ago. The garden in all its goodness is a distant primordial memory. A reality is life east of Eden in a world that is anything but good. Yet the memory of life in the garden, life lived in the presence of God, is buried deep within our DNA. And so there's a longing within us to return to the garden, to return to God, even if we don't understand that longing for what it is. You know, when I was on the Camino in Spain a few years ago, I met many people who were walking the Camino looking for something, but not really knowing what it was. And it's that longing that lies behind humanity's spiritual searching, a deep sense that there's more to life than just our physical existence. It's a longing to return to the idyll of the garden. But we live in the world that's east of Eden. We're left wondering if and how our world can be restored to a place where every person on the planet can agree with God's declaration that creation is good. And yet there is hope. For the story of Adam and Eve's banishment from the garden and all the broken relationships that result from their disobedience, well, that's not the end of the story. The story continues on through the creation and the history of the people of Israel. It tells of God's love and mercy and forgiving grace in the person of Jesus, and the continuation of the story of Israel in the church. A people called on a mission of reconciliation and renewal in and through Jesus, the saving King. It's a story that ends with the renewal of all things and a restoration of all that was ours in the garden. The mission of the church is participation in a movement from God to the world. The church is God's instrument for that mission, and so there is a church. The church exists because there is a mission, not the other way around. To participate in mission is to participate in the movement of God's love towards people, since God is a fountain of sending love. So I want to begin this series by affirming that the local church and the mission it is called to lies at the very heart of the human story that's told in the Bible. And it's through that the church's participation in God's mission that God will remake a broken world. What I hope to do over this series of signposts is to unpack how and why the church is the only hope for a remade world in the very wide context of the human story as it's told in the Bible. It's a story of scattering and gathering, and it's a story that will take us from the beginning of Genesis right to the end of the book of Revelation. In the 4th century AD, Gregory of Nazianzus wrote, "The very best order of beginning every speech and action is to begin from God and to end in God." He might have been thinking of Genesis 1 verse 1 actually when he said this, but his point stands. For if we're going to think of the human story, then we must begin with God, for it's with God that the human story begins, as Genesis puts it in its opening words, "In the beginning God." However, it's another text I want to turn to just now, one that's a defining text for the people of Israel. Deuteronomy 6:4, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." In the Hebrew text, that verse there are only 4 words, and the climax of the statement is the word one. The God of the Bible story, the God who is in covenant relationship with Israel, is one. The Bible will go on to show this oneness includes the Father and the Son and the Spirit in a trinity of being. And it's outside the scope of this signpost to explore what we mean by speaking of God as a Trinity. But if you want to study that further, there are plenty of excellent books on it, not the least Matthew Barrett's book, Simply Trinity. For now, I just want to note that the statement that God is one is not a mathematical formula. It means so much more than that. And I want to explore 4 specific implications of this declaration. Firstly, to say that the Lord is one means that the God of the Bible, the Lord Israel's God, is the one and only true God. All other gods are not gods at all, but are in fact worthless idols made of wood and stone or made up from the imagination of human beings. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul puts it this way: "We know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, that there is no God but one." But that he meant an idol has no real existence, no life or reality independent of the minds of their worshippers. If there was no one to worship them, they would be known for what they are, simply bits of wood and stone, etc. But the God of the Bible exists and would continue to exist even if we did not. For he is the one and only true living God. It's not surprising then that idolatry is the most discussed issue in the Bible. And in fact, the root of all sin is idolatry, insofar as all sin is, in fact, something or someone that takes the place of the true and living God. And that seems very odd to modern minds. It seems too exclusive, too narrow, and yet there's a sense in which that's correct, that it is narrow because it's claiming that there's only one God. And yet all people are invited to come and be in a relationship with this God. So it's not exclusive in that sense at all, but is inclusive. Secondly, to say the Lord is one means that there is only one true reality in the universe. We live in a time when the prevailing worldview is what philosophers might call postmodern deconstructionism. What that means is that we each create our own reality or truth. If you think that something is true, then it's true for you, even if it's not true for me, or even if facts contradict it. In the French deconstructionist philosopher Derrida encapsulates this idea in his simple statement that the reader writes the book. In short, that means that the author's intent in writing the book cannot be known and is in any case irrelevant, because the book only means what you think it means. A few years ago, I attended a lecture by the Anabaptist theologian David Gushee on the subject of truth in an age of fake news. And his primary example was the so-called Sharpiegate event, in which President Trump used a Sharpie pen to change the course of a hurricane on the map. His claim was false, but was eventually verified by the director of the US Weather Service after he was threatened with the sack if he didn't publicly confirm the president's claim. President Trump had in fact made hundreds of statements that were demonstrably false, but that were believed by millions of people, despite all the widely available evidence that those statements were false. Based on all available evidence, Gushee concluded that the president's followers were simply prepared to believe, not that they were simply prepared to believe lies, but rather that they were creating their own reality, one in which these things were true, because it was true for them. The truth of that is perhaps best encapsulated in a now famous phrase coined by one of President Trump's advisors, Kellyanne Conway, who described one particular presidential lie as alternative facts. And actually, that takes us right back to the opening verses of the Bible as well. Because you can say that Adam and Eve's sin in the garden was the creation of their own reality, of alternative facts. But the actual fact is that there is only one true God, and that means there is only one true reality in which we must live. And humans don't get to decide what is real and true, good or bad. For the one God determines what is real and true. Thirdly, the fact that the Lord is one means that there is one objective morality in the universe. In other words, some things are just absolutely fundamentally right, and some things are just absolutely fundamentally wrong, independent of our personal worldview or our personal beliefs or the cultural norms of the society in which we live or the circumstances that we're in. Irrespective of all that, across all cultures and all times and all circumstances, some things are wrong and some things are right. In fact, without the existence of the one true God, the very concept of truth, beauty, good and evil, well, those concepts have no real basis in reality, but are all irrelevant, abstract philosophical constructs. Whilst Western cultures used to believe this, over the last 300 years, there's been a gradual but accelerating shift away from the view that now the primary guardian of moral values is an action is actually public opinion. We no longer have any ultimate moral standard outside of ourselves and our own desires. The problem with this approach to morality is, of course, that public opinion is always changing. Now our society is united in its abhorrence of things like child abuse, rape and murder, etc. But on the other side, behaviours that were considered immoral 50 years ago are now protected by law. And so behaviours that are regarded as immoral by the wider society today may in 50 years' time be regarded very differently. If public opinion determines what's right and wrong, good and evil, well, that's always going to be a sliding scale. The thing is, we don't actually get to decide what is right and wrong or how we should then live. The one true God has already decided what is right and wrong, and we should live to the standards that he has set and not just make it up as we go along. Lastly, the fact that the Lord is one means that we can and should live together in harmony under the rule and reign of the one true God. In ancient Greek mythology, the world was believed to be the playground or battlefield of many gods who were all competing against one another for supremacy. Even today, in Hinduism, for example, there are countless gods and goddesses who compete with one another, and humans are nothing more than pawns in some divine chess game. The biblical worldview could not be more different. The world is a coherent and ordered place because the one true God who defines the meaning of reality and morality sustains it. We do not live at the mercy of capricious, unstable, malevolent deities, but under the rule and reign of the one true God. Of course, when we consider the world that we live in, the world east of Eden, statements like that sound at best idealistic and far from the reality experienced by people all over the world. There is a tension between the way things should be according to the Bible and the way things are. It's a tension that the Bible recognizes. After the exile in Babylon, the prophet Zechariah looks forward to a day in the future when the Lord will be king over all the earth. On the day the Lord will be one and his name one. So how can the Bible repeatedly declare that the Lord is one and all that that means, and yet at the same time look forward to the day when the Lord will be one? There's a clue to an answer in this text, specifically in the statement, and his name one, which clearly parallels the Shema of Deuteronomy chapter 6 that we read earlier. As Christopher Ash notes, the word name speaks not just of his identity, but also of his reputation of human beings acknowledging his kingship. In one sense, he's king over the whole earth now, but in another sense, he isn't. In one sense, he is one now, but in another sense, he isn't. He's the king in the sense that he governs the world exactly as he pleases. He's the sovereign Lord, and he is one in the sense that his reality and glory undergird creation. But he is not universally acknowledged, that is named and known as the one true God. His world is peopled by rebels who are governed by God despite their hostility and against their will. Zechariah looks forward to that great day when the renewed creation will be governed by God through a redeemed humanity who will gladly bow the knee and praise him. The story that the Bible tells is the story of how God will bring about that great day. And it's the story that we are going to follow through this series of signposts. It's the story of how we have come to live east of Eden and what life is like there and what we can do to move beyond life east of Eden and return to the garden. We live east of Eden in the tension between what is now and what is not yet. The story will take us from being scattered in the garden to being gathered at Pentecost as a foreshadowing of the final gathering in the renewal of creation and the New Jerusalem. Banished from the garden, scattered east of Eden, God will gather us to himself. And the story that the Bible tells is that story of redemption and renewal. And I look forward to making that journey with you. Thanks for listening.